you very much, board, management. We are gathered here for the final leg of the exercise. The 1997 Constitution, Section 175, Subsection 5, makes it a requirement for all public enterprises to submit their activity report and financial statement within 3 months of the end of each financial year. There has been a practice prior to the first legislative session of the 2017 Assembly of backlog in the submission of activity report and financial statement. When we assumed the responsibility, we decided to put an end to the backlog by building up a commitment based on agreement with the public enterprises for the effort to amend the trend that was evident. We employed the provision which gives us power to extend the submission of reports so that they will be able to put an end to the backlog. Now we have come to the end of our own term, and we envisage that by April we should be able to create a template that other assemblies would be able to rely on to ensure that public enterprises are accountable to the National Assembly as provided for by the Constitution. This is why we have the aim to submit activity report and financial statement covering the year ended 31st December 2015 to 31st December 2019. And we are hoping that public enterprises will submit their 2020 reports no later than the end of this month, thus giving us an opportunity to be able to also review the 2020 activity report and financial statement and thus put an end to the backlog in their presentation and consideration. But the Gambia Post Authority is not an ordinary institution, and the Constitution provides for public enterprises to be established to serve as an arm for the rendering of efficient service to the public, and also to provide an alternative to taxation. A government that depends entirely on taxation, grants and loans cannot be able to sustain public services on a sustainable basis. It has become evident that sustainable development must rely also on the creation of public enterprises that will be able to pay dividends to the state. And the Public Enterprise Act states very clearly the basis for establishing public enterprises before the coming into force of the 1997 Constitution. The Public Enterprise Act preceded the Constitution, and it states very clearly under Section 3 that the principal objective of every public enterprise shall be to operate as a successful business, and to this end to be as profitable and efficient as possible. Operate in accordance with government objectives for that sector, and be a good employer. So essentially, as far as the state is concerned, the public enterprise is supposed to provide those services and meet those objectives as stipulated by them. We are given the responsibility to scrutinize the operations of the Gambia Port Authority for the year ended 31st December 2019. And in doing so, we should always alert our minds to the objectives for setting up the Gambia Port Authority. The Gambia Port Authority does have its own statute, which states clearly what it is supposed to do. The statute established in 1972 may need further amendments or even complete overhauling, and we would wish recommendations to that effect if you so see the need. We have seen what the statute indicates is very broad. It's not only to load and unload any ship in Gambian waters or provide all the facilities that are necessary, appliances, to enable the ships to carry on as they should in an efficient manner, not only to provide other appliances to salvage life, or to license, register, and regulate all inland watercraft, and this shows that all watercraft, ferries, whatever, would have to be licensed by the Ports Authority. It's not only to invest in all those areas, including even in moving into our own waters, providing vessels to move into our own waters. The responsibility is broad, and we need to look at it and see whether that is what you would wish it to be, because it includes to acquire, construct, manufacture, maintain, or repair anything required for this purpose. That is, vessels, building ships. It has all the latitude to control not only the Banjul port, but Gambian waters in general. So the specificity of your investments is what your activity report actually indicates. And we have gone through the activity report and have seen the areas where the port is actually concentrating on. And our analysis would be based on those activities that you have identified to be of major concerns to you. We have seen through your report that your concentration, the new master plan, and it is supposed to range from 2019 to 2038. Looking at your plans, we have identified some of the key areas that you would wish to move into by way of investment. And those investments would have to be properly assessed, and so you can be accompanied to move into such a domain. But looking at your performance, you've indicated to us that you have made revenue earnings which moved from 1.6 billion in 2018 to 1.7 billion in 2019. Now, what essentially is our major concern is your areas of investment. Because if you earn revenue, what is anticipated is that there will be investment both in terms of the development of the infrastructure to enable you to expand your profit-making venture, but also investment into areas where you'll be able to generate more income so that you will not rely on borrowings from others in order to be able to invest. Now, looking at the facts, and I'm sure the members would be looking into those areas, our major concern is the linkage between the two institutions, the Gambia Ferry Services Company and the Gambia Ports Authority. The Gambia Ferry Services Company Limited must be properly examined in its entirety regarding how it really came to be the subsidiary of the Gambia Ports Authority. We have looked at the Public Ferries Act and see that, well, essentially it's not a statute establishing a basis for the Gambia Ferry Services Company, but simply provides for the licensing of ferries that plow the waters. The Public Enterprise Act does provide for incorporation of companies through the order of the executive, called an incorporation order, which is published in the Gazette, and therefore ultimately under the Companies Act will be established as a company. What we would, if you do have, like to have a copy of the registration of the Gambia Ferries Company Limited under the Companies Act. So if we can get the articles of incorporation, articles of association and memorandum of association, useful to us to understand exactly the powers of the GPA vis-a-vis the Gambia Ferry Services Company Limited. So we need to have the legalities tidied up, so that we can see the integration. But looking at the disclosures, it is important to look at what you have told us regarding the relationship. We have seen the real threat that you have mentioned in terms of what the Gambia Ferry Services Company Limited expect Gambia Ports Authority to do to tidy up the financial difficulties that it has had and it is still having. Will the Ports Authority continue to shoulder what essentially led to the financial record that the auditors really projected to us? That is indicating that the impairment dealing with the ferry services is what led to the position of the adverse opinion of the auditors. And I read that we have audited the financial statements of the Gambia Ports Authority set out on page 12 and 35, which comprise the statement of financial position as at 31st December 2019, the statement of profit or loss, the statement of changes in equity, and the statement of cash flows for the year then ended, and notes to the financial statements, including a summary of significant accounting policies. In our opinion, because of the significance of the matters discussed in the basis for adverse opinion section of our report, the accompanying financial statement do not give a true and fair view of the financial position of the authority as at 31st December 2019 and of its financial performance and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with the generally accepted accounting principles and in a manner required by the Ports Act 1972 and the Companies Act 2013. Well, adverse opinion may not necessarily mean that the company is performing badly. It does not mean that. It means that they just simply cannot have a fair view of the true state of the finances of the company. And it's because, as they have rightly said, the Gambia Ferries Service Company Limited, Ferries carries out the business of ferry services, carriers of goods and passengers, etc. in the Gambia. The Gambia Ports Authority has significant, that's 80% equity interest in the ferries valued at $40 million, as noted in the Memorandum of Association dated 24th April 2021. We noted that GPA has been taking care of most of the operational expenses of the ferries, and the Deputy Managing Director of Ferries reports to the Managing Director of GPA. So essentially, they are calling for consolidation in the activity reports and financial statement of the two institutions, whilst your practice is really separate entities, but in actual fact, they are the same entity as far as the auditors wish to pronounce. That clearly, from their own vision, they could see that the two institutions cannot be separated, and one is drowning the other, and unless proper work is done to handle the situation, the difficulties that the ferry services will have will be directly impacting on the difficulties that the Ports Authority will also be having. So how do you handle these two situations had also been mentioned in the management letter. Looking at this, the members will be very much interested in knowing exactly what management intends to do to tidy up the legality regarding the two institutions, and what management intends to do regarding investment. Because the notes are clear that if we look at the Gambia Ports Authority, page 25, we will look at some of the investments. Ports Authority, we look at first, let's look at the investments, and that is really of concern. The notes investment, you do have investment in Trust Bank Limited, and the shares gives you 5.5%. Your company is supposed to invest in promoting all the facilities necessary for handling cargo and expanding that business enterprise in order to be able to render efficient and effective service. But somehow investment has gone into the trust bank. Maybe it's investment that helps you to earn more, as we said, so that you'll not be able to borrow, or you'll not borrow from others, but rather rely on your own shares and the profit dividend from the shares to be able to expand your investment capital. What is the rationale of the investment in Trust Bank, and how is it effectively assisting Gambia Ports Authority at the moment? We look at the GAM Petroleum. GAM Petroleum, not only did you in 2008 hold an investment of 10%, but it has been increased in 2016 by 4% to, I would assume now, 14%, because it has not been cumulatively given. So we would want to know whether the current holding in GAM Petroleum is 14% of the investment. Now, there is a competition between GAM Petroleum and Gambia Ports Authority because they are performing the same functions. It's only diversifying it into petroleum. But essentially, all cargo needed to be handled by the Gambia Ports Authority. So why did it become necessary? Instead of the expansion of GPA to that area and further afield throughout the country, so that it will be able to access cargo and therefore earn what it's supposed to earn. But here it has invested for, let's not call it a rival company, but something that just mimics, that does the same function. Why was it necessary? And why would ports put its money in such a venture? And what gain is it really having that it would not have had if it had really diversified into that particular sector? One expects that when you are diversifying, those are the areas. That's what ports need to look at throughout the country, nearer afield, the neighboring countries where entry of goods and services can actually come. So those are some of the issues that would. There was also investment in Galdia Holdings. And there we are told, I read, a joint venture agreement, we want to see the agreement, a copy of the agreement, was signed between Galdia Holdings at Marshall Island and the Gambia, government of the Gambia, dated 5th March 2011 to establish, develop, manage and operate 2 ferry boats. Now here, the 2 ferry boats really were bought on the basis of an investment strategy. It says that the agreement specified ownership of 55% Gallia Holdings with government of the Gambia 45%, whose shareholdings has been taken over by Social Security. So he's talking about taking over. Was it originally Social Security? He said it's Gambia government. Now, how did Social Security come to take over what was essentially the government share and the authority? So is the 2 institutions that have actually taken over the government responsibility. Did Port sign? Did Social Security sign? Or did they sign with the government afterwards? How did that really materialize? The investment was through a government directive, yes, and we would want further disclosure on that so that we understand the state of this investment, what has it really yielded, what was the value of the investment that is useful, so that, and also the agreement that will give us all the ideas. That is important. We've seen the investment also of 1% into NAWEC. Would we say that that has now, because it has been made on this investment, you're saying 100% provision has been made on this investment. So there is need for further disclosure so that we understand what this really means. The same thing with GAMCEL. So these explanations will help us to understand the investments you've made prior to 2019 up to 2019. What were the shortcomings? What are you intending to do to address challenges if there are? What is outstanding from that? These are issues. Of course, we have seen quite a number of disclosures which may help to explain some further issues. But clearly, we are interested in knowing what your current plans are as of 2019 regarding investment strategy. Would you be going into the same domain? And we have seen also where you have been helping in terms of advances of the Banjul Shipyard Company Limited. We will need more disclosure on this Shipyard Limited, currently what it means, because what we have noticed is that all this investment led to impairment, and the impairment is just reducing your profitability, and it's making the company, yes, it pays 50 million as dividend, but it could have paid hundreds of millions as dividend. So the issue is not just the 50 million, and it's maybe just ports that is doing that. All the other companies are not maybe fulfilling their contract, but essentially ports had greater capacity and could do more, and our objective is really to make you to do more for ports and for the country at large. Members, looking at the details of the linkage between the ferries and the ports, I believe that we have seen that the ferries too has been making some investments. We are told that it has made revenue from 380 million to, but it dropped to 340 million in 2019. And we've seen their assets, 998 million to 945 in 2019. We have seen the loans that it is taking. It is important that we look at ferries as it is, the contradictions that exist in the services that it is rendering for the new bridge, and what is its earning from it. Could there be alternative sources for the ferries in terms of earnings? Or would it require more investment into other areas? Because they are talking about moving into river transport. So do you just become stagnant with ferries and moving from one point to another? Or is there a grander plan for ferries? We hope that they're not just saying that, well, it's not making profit, so get rid of it or do something else with it. So what is the plan that ports have to be able to accompany ferries so that it can move to realize its fullest potential? So in that regard, members, I'll just leave you to deal with the details, and I'll therefore put the question that having received the presentation of the Gambia Port Authority and the Gambia Ferries Services Limited, Company Limited, and having considered the matters that were relevant to us to complete that exercise, that I now put the question that the members consider the activity report and financial statement presented for final adoption for the plenary to receive the report of the committee. Those in favor say aye. Those not in favor say no. The ayes have it. And the floor is now open for members to look at the presentation in detail. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, it is being proposed that during my intervention I pose some questions. I'm not sure whether the board and management took note of them. If so, would they want to dwell on some of them? and then if there are any outstanding matters, then we can look at them. Board, the floor is yours then.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's call upon my colleagues, starting with the MD of GPA, to try to give some responses to the questions that have been put on the floor. And later, Mr. Jawara would also answer those that relate to the ferries. And maybe I'll be in a position to also give opinions on how we are dealing with these matters moving forward. So, Mr. Jawate, if you can at least speak some of the MD.
Yes. Thank you, Honorable Chair, Honorable members, subject matter specialists, board chairman, colleagues, and our auditors. Honorable Chair, the first issue was about the relevance of the Ports Act in relation to the realities on the ground. One of the first tasks that the new board that was constituted in January 2020 did was to question the legal mandate under which the port is now providing services. And that warranted a decision to be made by the board that a review of the 1972 Ports Act must be initiated, and it is work in progress. And particularly to index it against corresponding legislation that has a bearing on port operations, i.e. the GRA Act and the GMA, that's Gambia Maritime Administration Act, and the Merchant Shipping Bill of the GMA also in 2016. Because some of the sections in the Ports Act are already now subsumed in terms of responsibility by some of those agencies. And even in the nomenclature that is cited in the Ports Act are no more relevant in terms of the current administration, in terms of the positions that are held in government. So these are the things that warranted the board to take a decision, and action is initiated with a view to reviewing the Ports Act to put it more into context with the current realities. So that is work in progress, Honorable Chair. And the steps, there's an internal review taking place at the level of the management, and consultation is being done with these two sister agencies that are cited. And along the line, they will have to do a peer review with sister ports within the sub-region particularly to try to benchmark. And then the necessary legal steps will be taken in terms of the national stakeholder consultation and also the drafting through the aegis chambers and through cabinet and subsequently through the National Assembly for consideration and ratification. So those are the steps being taken as far as the Ports Act is concerned.
Is there a time-bound program?
Yes.
Ideas, as you rightly put it, we can see very sound, but is there a time-bound program for the activity?
Yes, we're expecting that in the middle of this year, the process should have been complete as far as the consultations and the first drafting is handed over to aegis chambers. Currently, there is an internal team at the level of the management working on the draft, and at the top of my head, I cannot remember the date that we are given, but there are deadlines they are working on in terms of bringing the first draft to management to review so that the next steps can be guided. But it is work in progress.
Okay, any documentation will be useful for us because we are going to be producing a report and we are going to be making recommendations. So it means that then there should be that synergy in terms of our recommendations and in terms of what you are doing.
Certainly, it will be provided.
There are certain things that you want us to really focus on. It's good we get the documentation as early as possible.
Very well.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
With regards to the new port master plan, the Honorable Committee is being informed that what guided the decision for the investment was that in 2018, the GPA management commissioned a new master plan for the Port of Banjul. Because the master plan that the Port of Banjul had was 1992 and reviewed in 2001. And then 2008, there was an update. So between 2008 up to 2017, there was a lull. And to guide management into the investment decisions, the new master plan was commissioned. And it was by way of public tender. And an international consulting firm called Royal Haskoning of the Netherlands won the tender. And they were awarded the consultancy. In July 2019, February 2019, Royal Haskoning had submitted their report. And in July 2019, Cabinet approved the report. The primary recommendation of that report considered relocating the port of Banjul along the southern coastlines of the country in search of deeper water, as because of the physical constraints in Banjul in an estuary. But they looked at the business case, that the business case was not strong based on the demand forecast, that it's not a bankable project to invest in more than $500 million just to build the breakwater for a safe anchorage in the southern coastline, noting the traffic forecast. So they came to the primary recommendation that the port infrastructure can be expanded in Banjul based on the traffic forecast for the next 20 years. That's the 2019-2038 horizon. And in that, they came up with 3 components that were urgent, that needed to be done in terms of the capacity improvement. That is the jetty extension and acquisition of landed property within the contiguous zone of the port, which is the Havda area, and to invest in port digitization. Now, in doing the funding request, the consultants recommended that the GPA can go ahead and use its own resources and invest in these 3 urgent components, primarily to address the increased demand on the facility, because the traffic had grown in these intervening years. Prior to 2017, there was 7% growth on an annual basis. But between 2017, 18, and 19, there was a surge in traffic. And the consultants looked at the figures and determined that the growth factors were strong and real. Now, that warranted them to advise on these 3 urgent components to take care of the increased demand on the facility, because it is leading to congestion. Now, to stay in business, these 3 components were recommended. In soliciting the funding, the GPA had approached the option of a corporate loan through solicitations that were done from both local and international banks. And an international bank or development financier called Africa Finance Corporation was identified as the most responsive based on the offers that were received. Negotiations started with a view to accessing the funding using the port's balance sheet to guarantee the investment. But in the process, the development financier required part of their KYC due diligence that the GPA, the borrower, needed a letter of comfort from the Ministry of Finance because of the contingent liability on government. Now, in soliciting the request for letter of support, the Ministry of Finance advised that government would be better off looking for more concessionary terms from development partners. So that shifted the focus from a corporate loan to development finance access. Now, the development finance also has its own challenges because there's a lot of procurement, environmental impact assessment requirements, integrity, compliance procedures that have to be fulfilled prior to even the formal application being submitted for the loan application. The GPA is in progress with that, albeit with some delay, because the corporate loan, the anticipation was that by middle of 2021, the project would have started in earnest. But with the change of the financing option, a lot of preparatory activities needed to be done. But as it were currently, 2 of the important aspects that are conditions precedent to the loan application being submitted to European Investment Bank and African Development Bank is to do the preparatory studies. We have gone through tender and identified a consultant to prepare the environmental social impact assessment. And then on the side of the jetty, we've also run a parallel system of doing a pre-qualification notice. 18 international firms have submitted, and we've done a shortlist with a view to selecting a minimum of 6 of them to go to the next stage of the tender, which is an engineering procurement construction phase. On the side of the African Development Bank, the preparatory works have to be done to prepare a bankable project, because what the feasibility study did was to identify the needs, but it didn't go to detail to prepare a bankable bankability assessment so that it can be presented to any investor. So those are the things that the port is doing right now in terms of the investment for the master plan. But in implementing the master plan, other ancillary components also came which would complement the investment to add value to the expansion. And these are, for example, the jetty expansion, the way it is aligned in the proposal would lean onto the existing Banjul ferry terminal, and it will affect the ferry lane. So part of the study that we as GPA have now added in the bankable assessment is to consider the relocation of the Banjul ferry terminal from its current location because of the impact it will have on the jetty extension. and also acquisition of 2 new generation ferries for the Banjul-Bara route. Added to that also is the widening and completion of the Bond Road access, which is the main artery that leads into the port to ease the traffic congestion, and also to look at investment in the river transport, particularly the Basse Dry Port project that the GPA is adding into the fray. So these are complementary activities that go to add value to the investment that the port is proposing under the master plan. Honorable, maybe not to bore you with more specifics, I would want to.
I'm sure the members are very. Do you want
to? Okay. If I may just add, because we have issues that are affecting what you just presented in terms of acquisition of the additional land that we need in Banjul for the port expansion purposes, especially for container storage. There is an issue there with the land acquisition, in the sense that what was agreed was that the people affected would be provided with land opportunities in 𝐶𝐶𝐾𝐫, because there was a previous phase 1 in this expansion. Now, the 𝐶𝐶𝐾𝐫 residents are saying that they are making claims to that land that was originally allocated to port for the expansion purposes. And we are constrained, we are stuck now, because we cannot access, the people whose land we've acquired in Banjul cannot now be given compensated with a piece of land in 𝐶𝐶𝐾𝐫. So we are in a situation where it has very serious implications, in the sense that the port has already purchased, well, paid partially, met the partial obligation under the acquisition of this land, but we are not able to fulfill the allocation of land in 𝐶𝐶𝐾𝐫. And now they are asking for funds or compensation that was not anticipated, because our understanding was this land has already been acquired, accessed by government, and was going to apply for compensation of the people affected in Banjul. That is a potential, it's like a time bomb in terms of the fact that we've purchased, we've paid, but we've not completed the transaction. So I thought I would just put that on the table so that we can deal with it.
Thank you for that disclosure, because the question was going to go.
Yes, I have a question on the ports. Ferries. Now, when you go to the income,
you want to go into, well, you know what he suggested? It was to at least deal with some of the issues raised and then go into the details. You want us to go in? Do you have anything?
That's fine.
Do you have any more?
Yes, I'm just for the.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you just from talking about the acquisition of land in 𝐶𝐾𝐫, and then do you have any plan for expanding the ports through the sea, as this is happening in other parts of the world? Because instead of going to the land, people of Banjul acquiring land from them, compensating them, at the end of the day, this is our land, it will belong to our generations and stuff like that. Do you have any plan to expand the ports through the sea?
Well, in Banjul, the advice is against expanding seaward because of the hydrodynamics operating in the tributary. A lot of siltation happens along the shoreline, and any structure that is built on the sea would act as a groin to attract even more siltation, to the extent that over time, the structures might get embedded in the sand like they happened in the old government wharf. And currently we're experiencing a lot of siltation in Banjul Ferry Terminal because of the concrete platforms that were created for the 2 ferries that were acquired under this Galia partnership. So the engineering advice is against building any fixed installation on the sea. There's a possibility, but it's not cost effective. There's a possibility, but it's not cost effective, because what it involves is, in terms of design, you will need like deck on piles, like happens in other countries. Like, for example, Holland can be cited. It's below seawater, but they have a lot of structures on the sea. But it's a matter of cost benefit. Whether all those hundreds of millions are required to do seawash. Otherwise, the advice would have been to go in the southern coastline and build a port infrastructure where you have deep water. So the challenge in Banjul is because of the environment. That's why the seawash is it's an engineering challenge and it's very costly. And to maintain the infrastructure would require, for example, constant dredging to maintain the depth because of the adverse environment.
Yes, I think you have given us sufficient information regarding the master plan and the investment that is required. And you're emphasizing expanding the jetty and the digitalization. But the other element, I guess, is modernization of equipment. I think that is part of the program itself. Now, do you really believe that the consultants served you well and fully comprehend your challenge? Because what you are saying now is what your challenges are. Number one, that expansion of the jetty, because there is a lot of complaint, and I was going to come to that, that people feel that they have not really been, they feel they have been shortchanged. I want you to explain. And it will be important for the post to actually find out, do a special, let's call it an inquiry, and come up with the actual payment and how people came to agree and got compensated or not compensated. So would you be willing to give us concretely the people who have actually sold their land, the payments that have been given, and were there contractual agreements that they really gave consent? You know, sometimes in matters like this you need consensual agreements. Sometimes there are many families, sometimes it's the Kadi so there are some complexities. Have you handled all those complexities in terms of acquiring the land in Banjul?
Well, thank you, Honorable. I would comfortably say we have met our expectations in terms of the legal due diligence that is required in this acquisition process. Because this is the third experience that the GPA has in acquiring land which is within the contiguous zone of the port. The way it happened is an independent valuation is first commissioned to determine because the owners own the land in perpetuity in Banjul. So they are compensated both for the land and the structures on them with a replacement value. And in addition to that, an alternative plot of land is also allocated as part of the package for families that are desirous of constructing a dwelling house to maintain the family heritage. That's how the 𝐸𝐞𝐫𝐲 layout came into the equation. In terms of the actual negotiations, it's actually done between willing seller and willing buyer. And it has been determined in the evaluation report. An evaluation report was prepared prior to even engaging the families. And the process went through them identifying and appointing a family member who was given a power of attorney to sign on behalf of the family. The only contention, as the chairman rightly said now, is accessing the alternative plot, which was not part of the valuation or financial package. But this was done in compassion, because the very first exercise we did, it was recommended that what is lawfully provided in terms of the negotiation and what can be deemed to be equitable can mean two different things. So the GPA chose the second option, which is equity, at least trying to compensate the families to the extent that they will feel that they have not been shortchanged. That's why the alternative plot of land was brought into the equation, but it was not part of what was recommended in the valuation. In the acquisition, we have also realized that most of the buildings were residential property, which were third generation inheritance, as it were, because the occupants were not original family members, except for a few. And 80% of the plots have already been acquired, sales agreement signed, and financial compensation paid. It's only the alternative plot that we cannot access. That's why the occupants cannot vacate. 3 properties are in control.
You have a complaint commission or complaint committee?
We should.
Or if you have not, would you establish a complaint committee?
Yes, what the board has done is to get the Ministry of Lands and Regional Administration, the Ministry of Transport, Works and Infrastructure, which is our line ministry, and the Bakau VDC and the claimants themselves to form a tripartite arrangement with a view to finding an amicable settlement. Funds have been catered for in this 2022 budget with a view to compensating the claimants, because according to the Land Acquisition Act, there is a compensation for yield per acre per annum. It's provided for in a formula. So when that valuation was done, the whole area, the amount that is due as per the Land Compensation Act is about $2.1 million from the Ministry of Lands. And our independent valuer did about 1.9 million. So the difference is not much between the two. But the board gave instructions that let's handle the matter in an equitable manner. So funds have been catered to engage the claimants that this is what the law provides for, but the GPA out of its goodwill is willing to put this amount, and then the Bakau VDC also, if they have a project that will benefit the community, the GPA will also finance that project. So, but we are hopeful that we will be able to resolve it amicably. So that's the strategy we're approaching, and it's just a matter of now concluding the final bit. But in the half-die proper, 2 properties remain to be resolved. And the owners are claiming for values in excess of what the independent valuation has called for. So it's now a matter of marrying the variance between the two. But we are also hopeful that through an amicable settlement, we should be able to reach a consensus.
In terms of the recommendation of those who did the master plan, was there any consideration of the ferries and that was not part of their mandate?
No, it is addressed. That's why I mentioned in my earlier statement that
I'm saying the earlier master plan, was it incorporated in that master plan, or are you this an offshoot?
Well, no, it talked about the ferries in terms of how the expansion would affect the Banjul ferry terminal, but not to look at investing or rebranding the ferries as it were. That is another decision that the board has taken, but I would have come to that in response to one of the issues that Honorable Chair.
So do we allow him to quickly finish some of those points, or is he remembering too much? Members, what do you suggest? We allow him to, okay. Yes, okay.
No, on the master plan, only one thing remains now, which the board in its November 17th meeting gave a decision that it's good to be following the DFIs on this trajectory to realize the investment. But the pressure on the facility keeps mounting. Congestion is increasing and the volumes keep growing. So the board gave its decision that let's explore the private partnership option in terms of concession and look at negotiation points with a view to having government to decide on that strategic line. The advantage there is the investment or the expansion could be realized much quicker. So that also is an option that the board gave its recommendation, and it's for government now to make a pronouncement.
Okay, you can go to you said you were going to talk on other issues.
Yes, Honorable Chair.
The investments, especially the investments.
Well, yes. Yes. Okay, Honorable Chair. The ferries to be examined and the relationship with GPA. And another decision that the new board took was to commission a legal due diligence on how the relationship between the GPA and the ferries exists. I can remember fully the very first question the new chairman asked when he came into office is, what binds you legally to spend money on ferries? But what the information that was given at the time was that there's a memorandum of and articles of association of ferries. At the time that government decided to go into partnership with these foreign investors, that's the Galia you mentioned earlier. So in that memorandum and article, the ferries was incorporated as a limited liability company, Gambia Ferries Services Company Limited. And the ownership is 80% Gambia Ports Authority, 20% Ministry of Finance. But what the board has decided lately is to look at the recapitalization of the Gambia Ferries shares to determine the shareholding, because interventions have been done since 2001 when ferries was delinked from GPTC to the back to the GPA. And this is one of the things that the auditors are treating, accounting treatment, that all this investment, they cannot be termed as investment because there's no share certificate. Even if it's a loan, there's no loan agreement. That's why that qualification in the account. But the board gave a decision and it's work in progress. Lately, what has happened is the ferries and the GPA management have been tasked to come up with a roadmap on how to rebrand the ferries. And it leads also to Honorable Chair, your other question, whether ferries just want to remain just ferrying across the point. And the board has commissioned that study for the ferries now to look at rebranding. And what is being taught is to have a river crossing authority, agency, or whatever. But it's work in progress, and the decisions and recommendations will be forwarded for the appropriate authorities to make a pronouncement. And that would clearly define the relationship between the two entities and also absolve the legal, constraints that are. But what exists is that it's 80% ownership GPA, 20% Ministry of Finance. That's why it is deemed as a subsidiary of the GPA. But in accounting treatment, the parent-subsidiary relationship is not very clear, and why some of these constraints in terms of the accounting treatment.
Investments, can you look at some of them?
Yes, and yes, I mentioned the articles and memorandum. We will submit the copies. And then investment in Trust Bank. I would maybe at this stage invite the Director of Finance to make a pronouncement on our investment in Trust Bank, in 𝐸𝐴 Holding, GAM Petroleum, NAWEC, and GAMSEN.
Okay. That way, which Managing Director, Honorable Chairman, on the Trust Bank Limited investment, it was acquired in early 1990 to mid 1990. And the amount has been 16,990,000 over the years. It was the only viable investment because annually we generate about $3 million, dividend from this investment. So it was a strategic move to have part of our liquid funds in that bank. A dividend had been generated, over the years. GAM Petroleum, the initial investment was 10%. It was through government directive that we invest in the GAM Petroleum, and that was around 2009 or 2008, and for up to 10 years, it had not been realizing any dividend or return on investment. But for the past 2-3 years, we've been, earning return on investment because we've been earning about 16 million dividend from the investment in GAM Petroleum for the past 2-3 years. So there was a time also in 2016, there was some stakeholding that was to be disposed of, and government also proposed that we acquire additional shares, and that was the 4% shares, and that makes it 14% in GAM Petroleum. For the 𝐸𝐴 Holdings, this represents the 45% shares that the GPA invested in the GAN Holdings company, mainly for the acquisition of the ferry 𝐴𝐵𝐺 and 𝐶𝐿 ferries and the construction of the ramps at the Trans-Gambia and the Banjul Bara terminals. These are investments that definitely didn't realize any return on investments, and they are impaired, 100%, fully impaired. Recently, we even wrote to the Ministry to government for the possibility of GPA being refunded or to offset this amount from the loans that are due to be paid to government. For the NAWEC investment of 1 million, it was, I think, since 1994.
Yes, this was stability section here. Because you mentioned in you mentioned that 45% was construction of the grounds and the two ferries by the number of security. But now when you go for it, it's saying that the shareholders have been taken by social security. Why?
Okay, it's the portion of government, which is the 45%, which is shared between GPA and Social Security. So why I said 45% is, as far as the government holding is concerned, 45% is taken over by GPA, 45% Social Security, and Ministry of Finance, 10%. So that makes it 100%. That makes it 100% for the government.
It is divided again between Port Authority, Social Security, and government.
And government, yes, Ministry of Finance, 10%, yes.
You know, it's 55%, 45% with this Marshall Island and Gambia government. Gambia and Gambia. Yes, so that 45% is three. That 45% is divided between the three institutions. Government, Social Security, and
45%. Ministry of Finance, 10%.
So that investment is not ongoing. What is the status of that investment?
Yeah, I guess we should let's understand. It is called investment, but it is not, what we define properly as where you assess and say, I put my money in this activity and then expect certain return. These were directives where the port has been asked to contribute to acquire this asset. It's not based on any proper study, investment study of the port, like it's a plan that this is where we're going to place our money. These were directives, and you can look at, I would call them the so-called remnants of the type of instructions public enterprise were given to acquire certain assets, that the government thought. Because when you want to establish a business, they tell you that you have to take some ownership share, and government would decide who has the liquidity, it's whether GPA or Social Security, to acquire those assets. But the profitability of it was never taken into consideration. And like it is, we've seen, most of them, we've never received any dividends from them. And some of them we are even making provisions. Even the acquisition of these ferries, all of them, these ferries never operated in the country. Now they are being sold as scrap. So that's why what he is asking for compensation, because they were saying that some of the assets that were recovered from the Jammeh regime, that we should make a claim, so that when those assets are sold, part of the court should be compensated for some of those decisions. I think that is what we were trying to put up.
And if I may, Honorable Chair, with your permission, just to give you the latest, what is happening is that government had entered into arbitration settlement with the foreign partners, Galia, and a settlement agreement was agreed, and government had to compensate the foreign partners. So the relationship has now been severed, and I think 500,000 euros was paid by government in the arbitration settlement. It was an international arbitration. Sorry? Yes, to Galia. And the assets now have fully reverted to the government, 100%. And as Chairman rightly said, the ferries, well, under the arrangement. So the ferries are now being sold as scrap, and the concrete platforms themselves are causing some environmental hazard in terms of attracting more siltation that is affecting the landing site for the ferry in Banjul.
They have to be demolished. We have to.
Well, that's the recommendation. And what Mr. Salah is mentioning is that we have engaged Minister of Finance officially with a view to having the amounts that were invested or the amounts that were paid by the GPA into this project recovered from the existing loan liability that GPA is owing to government under the third port project, because there is some $230 million is thereabout that is remaining to be paid by GPA to government under that.
So do you know why the ferries did not afford?
Well, they were not technically suitable for the environment.
They were not technically suitable
For the environment, no.
And those who sold it before had no contractual agreement before it was sold. What was the problem? Can you help us to understand what they did wrong? And how do we prevent recovery?
Well, the ferries,
what should have happened?
Mr. Jawara will come on it later, but ferries normally, the way they are procured by the institution in the past is on a design and build model. We create our own design based on the environment, our physical characteristics, and the landing facilities that we have, and we say that this is the type of design we need for this area, but that was not done. The ferries were just acquired as is, refurbished and supplied for the route. And there's a lot of operations.
Refurbished ferries, it's not.
Yes, they are not new. Yeah.
So they were just refurbished ferries and sold.
Yeah.
And then bought.
Bought. And then deployed, but they could not operate because they were not technically suitable.
So no preliminary study, nothing whatsoever.
No.
So now you said they are being sold as scrap. Why is it that they were not sold elsewhere where they would be suitable? No. Did they do any form of study to find out whether they could be used elsewhere?
Well, since they were technically not suitable, okay.
You know, lack of suitability does not mean it's not suitable elsewhere. I'm just saying, have we done due diligence to see what could be done to get back the money that was spent?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I could come here, I think when the ferries were purchased and brought here, there have been some initial trials as to see, the operability of the ferries, whether they could be operated. And I think some trials were done. And during that trial, it was found out that the engines were not in the best of conditions, and the machineries were not also in so great operation. One of the ferries, in fact, during the first trial, the ramp, was completely broken off, and then it fell into the river, and that was how that trial was suspended, and the trial never took off again. It would be challenging, of course, to sell such a ferry, because in that condition, the ferry wouldn't be able to take itself anywhere, without support. And that support, of course, requires huge amount of money to be able to do that. In fact, before anybody would even want to buy such a ferry, you would have come and do a survey on inspection on the ferry to see, the technical, capability of the ferry, whether the engines are in sound condition and all the systems. But these ferries, I think from the day go, there has been several challenges with the engines. There have been several challenges with the whole of the ferry itself. The piping system, a lot of the auxiliaries were not in so great condition. So as a result, it couldn't be sold anywhere. So at the end of the day, looking at
a very technical question, because we are writing a report, you are helping us. So because you are directing our minds more towards fraud than a technical difficulty. Because if somebody purchased what was bad and brought it in the country and start testing it and invest all that, and that's serious. One can understand purchasing what was good, and then you have technical difficulties. So did they actually do assessment, technical assessment of the status of the ferry, and know that really this could not be utilized because it was purely scrap? Or is it really, are we still dealing with technical issues? Because one thing that we must always bear in mind is that if you're going to dispose asset, you must dispose of it in a manner that would give you the best return, not just dispose it for disposal's sake. So even that, we will be asking you about your policies in terms of disposal of assets, because that matters also, because through that you can give away something that could earn billions.
Anyway, what happens, Honorable Chair, in a normal purchase like this, you would have what we call International Classification Society certificate to show seaworthiness, engine log books properly maintained, last dry dock date. These are all the elements that would precede even buying a refurbished ferry. But those elements, those steps were not even taken. So I think just to allude to what Mr. Jawari is saying, they were not technically suitable for the environment. And after the trials, the ferry is now even causing a hazard in the environment because she has actually run aground and is posing a threat to the marine environment. And the decision to sell by scrap was informed by a survey report that was done by certified engineers. And the residual value was also established. We went through the necessary disposal steps in terms of the advertisement, requesting for quotes, and identifying a potential buyer.
Okay, maybe just to add up to for the purpose of understanding of that technical aspect of it. I think the first aspect probably, of course, which was the reason why the ferries couldn't operate, is that is the size of the ferry. And at some point there was this huge dredging cost component that was very difficult to meet. But apart from that technical in terms of the environmental suitability of operating the ferry, there is also the technical condition in terms of the machinery and also the auxiliary systems on board the ferry. So it is this latter part I was trying to explain, and this is what probably necessitated for us to sell the ferry as a scrap. But initially, the reason why it wasn't able to operate at the time, it was because the draft was too high, the ferry we also, and also initially one of the ferries during the trials, the ram broke off, and there was also this high consumption of hydraulic system during the trials, hydraulic oil during the trial. So this all combined, to inform that the technical suitability of the ferry was not really, that appropriate for this particular environment.
Okay, let's suggest that you give us a sort of a report on your assessment of this ferry, so that we know exactly what happened and why you got to this level. For the sake of our report,
yes, I think
the losses that have been informed.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think there was a task force was sanctioned by the GPA management, and I think a report was submitted. So we can
get a copy of it.
Yes, we can send you a copy of that.
Yes, go forward.
It was on the investment, maybe just the 𝐬𝐴 one, which is 𝐬𝐴 and 𝐼𝐴.
Sorry. Okay, Chairman, for the 𝐼𝐴 and 𝐬𝐴 investments, these are investments not necessarily for their financial viability, but it was a requirement that for those companies to be to be established as a company, at least they have to float out some of their stakeholdings, and that's how government also engage, public enterprises to opt for this 1%. So that's how this 1% came about. So that's why we invested in 𝐼𝐴 in 1994 and 𝐬𝐴 in 2016, thereabout, yes.
But you get the information and give us something concrete afterwards, so that we know, as you said, the dates, etc. Of what benefit are you deriving anything from it? Are you deriving anything from the investment? The two.
So whether we get any dividends?
No, since the investment were done, there's no return on investment. There's no.
You received information regarding.
But that's why we have even impaired all of them.
Do you have annual information regarding the status of investment? Do you have any report from on the investment?
No.
Okay, so you are there as board member? Yeah?
No.
Well, I'm asking the question.
No, yes, we are.
Board member at 𝐼𝐴.
No. For 𝐬𝐴, there's a board member. The MD is a member of the board.
𝐼𝐴.
But for 𝐼𝐴,
No.
You are not represented.
no, I don't know.
There's been some transformation in 𝐼𝐴. There's been some transformation at 𝐼𝐴 in terms of the governance structure. That may have problem, but in the past we did sit on there.
Yeah, but you know, we are looking for current information.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Information. So if you need to find out and tell us, because you know why we are asking the question. You put something, you're supposed to be a stakeholder, and therefore you should know what is happening. So somehow you should have a sitting in the
Yes, to summarize, the genesis of most of this investment is not a decision within the authority. And I think it's a matter of realizing that if certain investment decisions are imposed, these are some of the consequences. Because it's like you are not directly responsible for the investment. So you are directed to invest, you invest, and then you kind of accompany whatever is going on. You don't feel like you have the power is there, it's just symbolic. But the real power to decide on what is going on rests somewhere, where that authority came to invest in the whole thing. So I think what we should learn from this experience is that enterprise should be allowed to make their own investment decisions.
And this is precisely what, Chair, why we are asking the question.
That's right.
So that we know the details and we know exactly what to recommend to prevent any recurrence or to amend what may be a trend that is not fully noticed. That if there is any investment, then what is the contract in the first place? Because a contractual relationship of some sort, you owning something, and therefore entitling you to something. And that's what we are trying to inquire. We don't want to suggest board representation. You tell us what is there so that we know whether it is the proper thing or it's not the proper thing to do, then we'll make the right recommendation. And it's good to look at all the investment that have taken place so that you can give us more information before we finalize our report. So that's important. How do you protect Gambia Ports Authority so that impairment will not ultimately undermine all its profitability by virtue of entering into something that from the very beginning you know will not serve the interest of the company. That's very important. And members now.
Yes, just one final one. The Bangalore shipyard, the GPA is investing from its own resources with a view to replacing the cradle. That's where the slipway we used to bring vessels out. And we are a first customer of the shipyard, although it's a limited liability company. Also 99% or 100% owned by GPA now. And we also provide the memorandum and articles. But we are going ahead with the rehabilitation for maintenance of our GPA-owned craft and the ferries, because there is no alternative for a shipyard in Gambia, and some of these craft they are required to be slipped out of the water for underwater repairs and dry docking, and there is no alternative. And particularly the ferries, because of the way they are configured, cannot be towed out of the country into the open sea for dry docking, maybe in Senegal also. So there is no option but to repair the shipyard and have our own ferries and our craft being repaired.
So the development of the shipyard.
Yes, Your Honor. Well, from GPA's own resources. I can allow Mr. Jawara maybe to touch on the question about the ferries, way forward, rebranding and challenges.
Okay.
Ferries?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Honorable Chairman, I think I want to start from the question you posed earlier, the relationship between Ferris and GPA, how Ferris became a subsidiary of GPA. You also talked about the Public Ferries Act of 1966. The Public Ferries Act actually is like a ferries regulation. But in 1972, there was this GPA Act, and under which there was a ferries regulation. And that regulation is more or less like an update of the Public Ferries Act in terms of the issuance of ferry license and the tariff charge and other things. Then later on, the ferries was later incorporated as a limited liability company. But as the MD, said earlier, that was just in preparing the necessary structure for the ferries to be able to get into this joint venture with Galia Holding for these two ferries that were jointly purchased by the GPA, Social Security Government, and Galia Holding. And if you look at the tariff or the ferries as a company, because government has a stake there, so it would be qualified as a public enterprise. But looking at the ferries, the tariff is hugely regulated, and then the ferries is not operating as a profitable enterprise. In that, we are operating a lot of services that are social in nature, we call it, because we are not charging the right tariff structure. And because we are not charging the right tariff, we are not able to meet our obligations in terms of, buying fuel, in terms of spare parts, in terms of the necessary input to operate an efficient service. So as a result, from time to time, GPA intervene to subsidize this operation. So in the accounting principles, I'm not an accountant, it is classified as investment. But on the side of the ferry service, we do not look at this as investment. We look at it as subsidy. Because this is, it takes a certain amount or certain cost to be able to run an efficient service. And then the users are charged accordingly to be able to, pay that cost. But if we are charging less, and then as a result, we are not able to fund the cost internally, and the funds are coming from GPA probably to be able to, finance and operate all these stations, then I think that, should be clearly defined whether actually that should be regarded as investment, in which case the GPA will expect a return, or it is just a subsidy. If you look at the ferry service, as we said earlier in our activity report, currently it's only Banjul Bara that is breaking even. If you look at all the provincial stations, the revenue we collect on those stations is hardly able to pay for the fuel cost. And then, we are expected to operate those services. So as a result, GPA intervenes to be able to, fund, those gaps. I think that's what I want to comment for now until there are further questions.
Well, in terms of definition of public enterprise, what we are informed is that public enterprise, according to the Public Enterprise Act, it says that public enterprise means a corporation or any company whose equity is wholly owned by government or partially owned by government together with another government institution or wholly owned by a government institution. So essentially, that's what is in the Public Enterprise Act. And then the Constitution defines it in this way on the Section 175, that a public enterprise is that the public enterprise means any body corporate or other body or institution wholly owned or controlled by the government. It expands into even institutions that may not be profit-making. You see, if you look at page 20 of the financial statements and reports of the ferries, and you look at note 18, listen to it. It says that since the delinking of the ferry services from GPTC, the Gambia Ports Authority had been providing financial support in the acquisition of capital item and funding of the operation and capital budgets. The total amount owed to GPA as at 31st December 2019 was $952,900,000. As of 2018, $915,700,000, representing the operational and capital budget support. Furthermore, an MOU was signed between the parties in which the GPA is guarantor for the acquisition of the Kunta Kinte ferry with outstanding balance owed as at 31st December 2019, $336,900,000, while 2018 what was outstanding is $284,100,000. So we're not talking about what is subsidy in this regard. The relationship is what we have just said. That's why we are saying it is important to look at the relationship again. Since this is an institution, if it is going to be a subsidiary, then there must be some consolidation that will ensure a win-win situation and survival situation, not something that drags each ultimately to the den for the lions to have their share. So the essence now is really to look at the relationship. You are technicians and you have the knowledge base. It's about managing resources, managing institutions. So how do we manage these two institutions so that they move towards real viability? That is really the challenge at the moment. Members, you can go ahead. Yeah. Yes.
Question there on the ferries. That is, looking at the income, the ferries is a real operating negative. That's the low price.
Can you tell them the page? In page 9 of the income statement.
Yeah, exactly. Income statement, yes, ferry.
Financial statement,
Yes,
for the year ended 31st December 2019.
exactly.
So page 9 of the income statement. So remember what are you saying?
Yes, I said they are operating at a loss. And then when you go to page 22 to 24, administrative and the personnel cost.
Have you seen it, GPA?
Yes.
Saying that you are operating at a loss of 46 million.
Then for the personnel cost, in the year under review was 115,068,000. And then for that of the general administration was 75,247,000, respectively. Then these things increased for the personnel cost by 10,445,000, and then general administration of 25,140,000, respectively. That is in the year under review. Now I just want to know the rationale behind why, as far as the company is operating at a loss, why this increment in personnel cost and administrative cost? Not decreasing, but is increasing, and then you are not gaining any profit. What is the rationale behind that?
Yes, go ahead. You got the point.
Thank you very much.
financial statement, it is quite true that you would see that there is a $40 million decrease in the revenue earnings of the company, which is about 10%. And one would maybe expect that for the cost, you would have a correlation between the cost and the revenue earnings. But you really have to understand the nature of the cost. Like if it is cost of sales, one would say that there is a very strong correlation between cost of sales and revenue. So which means the more operation you do, the higher the cost would be. So it's purely variable. But if you look at the administrative expenses, most of it is fixed by nature. So regardless of the operating activities of the company, there are certain costs that you would still have to pay. Like whether you run the ferry for one trip or whether you run it for 5,000 trips, I mean, the cost of insurance maybe would be the same. You know, so there are certain costs like rates. Also, you would have to pay whether or not you have any operations. So for the administrative expenses, the ones that are purely variable and have a direct correlation with the operating activity, I mean, you look at them, most of them are going down. But you look at some of the costs like hull and machinery and P&I insurance. I mean, that, you know, you just have to pay regardless of the planned level of activity. And in that case, you will see that from 2018 to 2019, you know, the cost has actually gone up by about $3 to $4 million, and it is due mainly because of the depreciation of the dollar against, you know, the dollar. So during the same period as well, I mean, we had to write off obsolete stock, and rates increased from $250 million to about $3 million. So with regards to the cost of sales, I mean, there's an increase of about almost 30 million. So this is the period that followed the opening of the bridge. So Ferris, as a company, had a deliberate strategy to invest in the ferries to increase their technical capabilities to prepare for the competition with the bridge. So we had to spend over $30 million to increase the operational efficiencies of the ferries. And so that is the reason why, you know, the cost of sales increased from 104 to 135 million in 2019.
So, satisfied? Go ahead.
What we are trying to ask here is that if you look at the operating cost, for instance, on the financial statement, you look at the administrative expenses and also you look at the revenue that you guys are generating, the number of jobs that you are doing, and you look at the administrative cost. We expect it to be correlated, at the number of the works that you're doing to reflect on the cost of the service that you are providing. But in this case, that is not happening.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to explain, that you have to understand the nature of it. If it is administrative expenses, you know, most of the cost items there are not variable, they're fixed. So it's like when you talk about insurance for the ferries, whether the ferries are operating at 10% capacity or whether they're operating at 99% capacity, you know, it's not relevant. If you decide to run the ferries, even if it is going to be for a day, you have to get your hull and machinery insurance, and you will have to get P&I insurance. And then a lot of cost, you know, on the administrative expenses don't have anything or correlation with the level of activity. Okay? So when it comes to cost of sales, which is mostly variable, so it has a direct correlation with the level of economic activity. So in that case, the number of ferry trips you do would determine how much you will spend on fuel, how much you would spend on lubricants, and that sort of thing, because the cost is variable. So I don't know whether that would answer your question.
You know, the issue is really not trying to pin you down, but to try to help you to reflect on how to make sure that your institution acts rationally when it is having difficulty. You know, the point forced by the member is that, in fact, you are suffering from a loss. Then why should there be an increase in administrative costs? And that's what you are trying to explain. And your explanation is that, well, some expenditures are mandatory. You just cannot waive them. But what about those you can waive? Okay, let me just give you an example. Donations, 2 million. Page 23. So you are poor and you are giving a donation of 2 million. I'm just, you know, being a devil's advocate. Yeah?
Honorable Chairman, if I can.
Yes.
I think there are two issues here. First, on page 22.
Yes.
If you look at it, there's a bonus component.
Yes.
For about 13 million.
Yes.
Okay, so that brings us back to what we were earlier discussing about the relationship between GPA and Ferris. GPA, Ferris being a subsidiary of GPA. So this year, there was a bonus payment that was paid by GPA, and you have to go across the board.
No, the members are not asking about the bonus.
No.
Yeah, just allow me.
Okay.
You know, we are focusing on the correlation between loss and increase in administrative expenses. You know, that's the focus of the members. Now, either we justify that, or we see that really that's not the rational thing to do, meaning that in subsequent budgeting, that you would take that into consideration, that where there are losses, then due diligence will be shown in terms of what you find. So what we are now looking at is the administrative expenses to see whether there are items there that clearly could have been.
Yes. Indeed, if you look at page 24.
And that's what we would say. Just make sure that you take the point, knowing that, well, these are the recommendations we are going to make anyway, and it will guide your future operations. So just to take the point, and then we move. I think the point is taken. Really, wherever you suffer loss, it is better to show due diligence in terms of administrative costs, so that bare minimum what is necessary and reasonably justifiable. That's what yes, go ahead.
Yes, you go to the administrative cost. As for another thing on page 22. We have training, Banjul Bara crossing. We have seen 2018 it is 6.8, and 2019 is increased to 9.3 million. So who are those trained, and how often are they trained, and also where is training about? How do the training carried out? Where?
Yeah, in 2019 there was this rehabilitation of the Punta Ferry. All the engines were rebuilt, and that project has a training component. So the training was actually done in Banjul here, where a team was brought from Holland from the damaged shipyard to work with our engineers. And it took about, was it 2 to 3 weeks for engineers to be trained during hands-on training during that refurbishment project. So that was the reason why this training component increased.
9 million for 3 weeks.
Yes, but it is a huge team.
And if you look at the activity report on the last page, I think it was a requirement that you give a schedule of all the trainings that were embarked on by the institution, and you have it there. And these were trainings that were actually approved in the labor budget.
What will be helpful is more disclosures on things like this. You know, once you have them,
Yes.
put your notes there so that there will be more disclosure.
Yes. It's on the activity report, the very last page.
Yeah.
The training schedule for the period under review.
Where? Page?
The last page on the activity report.
That's the last page. The last page.
Training expenditure for 2019.
Yes.
This 9 million is spent on this training.
Sorry? Sorry?
What is that this 9 million is training of this?
What are you looking at?
You know,
The
this
last
one.
page is the training expenditure for 2019.
Last page.
This is training Bangalore crossing. Bangalore crossing. It's different. This amount is 6 million.
It's 6 million. This is 6 million.
That's different from the 9 million.
No, it's not different. The description as we have it in the financial should have just read maybe training and not Banjubala training. It's just training globally for the company. So what we try to do in the activity report is to give a breakdown of the trainings that were done during the period under review. Like if you look at the approved training budget, these were the planned training programs which were implemented during the year under review. So there is a slight variance between what you have here and what you have in the financial statement, because what you have in the financial statement I think is about 9 million. So maybe in addition to what was actually planned and done during the year.
You know what we are doing?
Yeah.
We are trying to gather facts.
Yeah.
We are not rational. We're just trying to gather facts. That's why they are so far. They see some discrepancies and you have to clarify. They're saying, well, training 6 million and then it increased to 9 million. So they are looking for justification for an increase to 9 million. Yeah, do you have a justification? Yes.
Honorable Chairman, no.
Remember, wait, let me remember. Do you have something?
Yes, I think if he is saying that this is the training, here the total amount is 6.7, and
Yes.
here is 9.3.
Yeah, that's the difference I want to explain.
Yeah.
If you look at that list, the training of the engineers during the installation project for the Kunta Kinte ferry, that component is not there.
Yes, but you know that is the issue. You know the issue is one of records.
Yeah.
Would you be able to submit that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think what you will do is to submit the additional training program that will justify the sum of 9 million.
Yes.
Yeah, so make sure that there is some shortcoming here. So make sure that you provide us with adequate disclosure that will give us the 9 million, because that's what the members want to know. Yes, go ahead. Member 4. We can go.
Yes, the same page, you go to vehicle allowances.
Vehicle allowance, okay. That's page 22 still. Page 2, vehicles allowance. Yes.
Yes, you see, 2018 is 9.2 million, 2019 is 10.4 million dollars. Who are these vehicle allowances read to, and is it Rationale?
Yes.
Who are entitled to these vehicle allowances?
Page 22.
Yes, page 22.
Administrative.
So you're saying that the vehicle allowance increased from 9.2 million to 10.4.
Yes. I'm just going to
well, I would say who they paid to, and maybe from my explanation, I could give justification as to whether it is reasonable. What happens is, like, according to the company scheme of service, once an employer gets to the level of grade 5, employee, you know, you're entitled, and you have a vehicle, you're entitled to vehicle allowance. So from 1 year to another, you know, maybe, you know, you have people moving from grades 4 to now grades 5, and then those employees will now be entitled to get vehicle allowances or vehicle loans, and once they get it, you know, they will be entitled to be paid vehicle allowance. And then maybe during the year also, I mean, you had a lot of people that are now qualified, you know, to either get these loans and get these allowances, or even buy these cars from their own resources and then claim for allowances to be paid for their movement to and from the office. So that is the reason why maybe the figure has increased from 9.2 million to 10.4.
So what's a vehicle allowance?
It is an allowance that is paid to an employee that owns a vehicle, an employee that is above grade 5, you know, to buy fuel and maybe to also maintain, you know, his vehicle.
That is to shuttle from work to
office to home, yeah.
So let's say that it's an allowance paid to the owner of the vehicle above grade 5.
Yes.
To shuttle from
to and from work, yeah. Yes.
That's the definition.
Yeah, that's right. I just have a follow-up question. You talked about promotion of the staffs, like from certain grade to grade 5, and you are entitled to a vehicle.
Yes.
So what are those criteria that you use in order to do those promotions?
The criteria?
Yes.
During every budget session every year, you know, heads of departments would have to prepare their own departmental budgets.
Okay.
And then there is a budget committee that is most of the time headed by the MD, or sometimes maybe the deputy MD, where heads of department would now have to put their proposals, and it is discussed, and where it is justified and management agrees to upgrade or promote an individual, you know, I mean, it is done. And so once we're done with that process, I mean, we will now compile a management approved budget, which is now also put before the board for their consideration. So once maybe the board gives approval, then it becomes the institution's approved labor budget. So once there is approval for somebody to be upgraded or promoted, then at the end of the year or beginning of the year, I mean, that person would be upgraded or promoted.
So yes, I have a follow-up question.
So you do have a promotion policy?
Yes.
You have a promotion policy?
Yes.
Members, they say they have a promotion
Yeah, but what I want to know is the promotion at the company, is it not based on the performance of the company that you are working?
Yes.
Because if the company is not doing well and then you keep promoting people, that means that you are going to spend more cost.
Yes, okay, well, that's logical. But essentially, is there a policy? Are there staff rules and regulations regarding promotion? You know,
Okay.
some things are based on the rule, regardless of what happens. The rule says that you get to this distance. So, question is, are there rules?
Yes, Honorable Chair. What management is guided from 2019 February going forward, there was a HR study that was commissioned, and it has clearly recommended good practice when it comes to promotion. And only 2 criteria have been applied now. It's either there is a vacancy or the staff is meritorious based on its performance. Before, people used to be promoted by virtue of them acquiring, academic achievement, like returning from training and things like that, and they were promoted. But it has been advised that that is not good HR practice. So what the management has adopted going forward since January 2019, and this has been scrutinized by the board, is that there are only two criteria to consider for training, for promotion. Either there is a vacant position, or the staff is meritorious based on his performance.
And this is stated per policy. It is there.
Yes.
It is given to all staff to know that this is the basis of promotion. It's part of the rules.
Yes, it's part of the rules. It's part of the rules.
Then, you satisfied with that?
My worry here is why opposition is, it is mentioned that the different provinces.
Okay, you are back to something.
Yes.
So,
It's a Bara crossing.
No.
This is Banjul Bara crossing.
Well, for now,
where
that's
are
what
you?
You know, yes, he is talking about all the general stuff. But here it is only, my worry is 10 million for only Bara crossing. So that's my worry. This is why I was worried.
It's very correct. Please. It's not a bantaba. I'm flexible, but this is parliament and inquiry. Okay, we are just trying to get the facts.
Yeah.
Okay, so and if it is wrong, you must acknowledge it's wrong. Don't allow us to, because otherwise your document will not pass here. We're not going to consider something, and, because we also must get the fair view that what we are considering is a fair view of exactly what you want to present before. So that's why we are verifying. So once we know that it's a fair view, then we can make analysis. Because that's why he's saying 10 million. And it's there, but that's what we are analyzing. So what is your view? Is that wrong? And if so, what is correct?
Thank you very much for the question. I think I have mentioned earlier that the description here is not accurate.
It's not accurate, okay.
Salaries, casual, bonus, gratuity, and not the Banjul Bara crossing or Banjul crossing. That is the because if you look at the chart of the financial statements, it gives the total that was spent on cost of sales or general admin expense. So on page number 22, we're trying to give a breakdown. So what you see here as Banjul Bara crossing, Trans-Gambia crossing is not applicable, is wrong, and then we would correct that.
So you correct it and submit the correct version to us?
Yes.
When do you think
No, don't go there.
Yes, somebody is saying?
No.
Yes, sir.
You wanted to say something?
Yes, so basically, how it works is there's always the consolidated income and expenditure statement. But if you get into the accounting system, say for example, training allowance, BBC, which is Banjul Bara Crossing, or JBC, Jangan. So it's a matter of going back to the system again and adjusting all these ledger names. So it's not a matter of it's wrong, or it's more from the source, which is the ledger in the system.
Yes, you understand. How do we remedy? You can see the difficulty it is posing. So
I think the starting point is is to start from the system and rename some of these various ledgers in the system, because the way it comes into the accounts is from the system to the financial statement. Yeah. So the starting point has to be to go back to the system and then rename some of these expenditure ledgers.
Can you understand?
I want to differ a bit with the auditor here. Yes.
Let us now say,
yes.
Why don't you meet and reconcile? See that we have a problem.
Yes.
And we want you to help us to solve the problem.
Yes, we would do that.
Could management and auditors meet and solve our problem for us and come back to us?
Okay.
Because that's the objective. Right? We're not trying to say who is right or wrong.
Okay.
But we just want a problem to be solved. So then, for that matter, members, we will leave them to eventually send us what is defensible on record. Any further issue?
Regarding his house rent allowance and residential allowance.
House rent and residential. You want the definition of house rent and residential? Yes, so can you explain house rent? Banjul Bara crossing. Isn't that what is still posing the problem?
No.
this one is different.
House rent and the residential.
Okay. So house rent, residential allowance, what is the difference?
I'm not sure even if I could give a technical definition of the two. It was something that we found in existence at, I think, GPA. So, and I cannot give a technical definition of the difference. So maybe Tamsir could help.
Yes, so then resort for go back.
Thank you very much, Chairman. For house rent, it is paid to staff between grade. House rent is paid to staff between grade 1 to grade 6, not at manager level. So that facilitates the paying of their house rent. What they are doing house. The other side, that's why it is paid. House rent. Yeah, that's right. To facilitate their what they are doing. Yeah, that's from grade 1 to 6. Once you get to a manager position, obviously we expect that you'll be able to have accommodation of your own, so you're not paid that house rent, so it ceases. Then for the residential, it came about in the new paid policy given by government to the Gambia Diversity Agency. They came up with residential allowance. That is, those who travel from 8 kilometers from their residential place to the workplace. But generally, traveling from your home to your workplace, so they call it residential allowance. So fixed amount was allocated as per the new pay policy. That's for the residential.
Yeah, as I said, transport allowance for a given grade.
No, for residential, automatically those.
It includes your house rent.
No, it's different from transport allowance.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Then it is a transport allowance of a different type. You know, you say it's residential allowance, different from house rent.
From house rent, yes.
Yeah, you know, here residence, the way it could be seen is your home. You are still paying house rent of a different type, or as you are describing it, because you are resident 8 kilometers from a given place, and then you are paid that sum of money. Then it is the form of a transport allowance. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, it's like transport allowance, but it's something that is specified in the new pay policy.
Yes, the nomenclature is residential allowance.
Once you live within, you have to live within 8 kilometers from the workplace.
Yes.
So, automatically you qualify for residential allowance.
Same place as
so,
you pay.
basically it means, almost every staff gets this residential allowance.
Management staff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you satisfied, member? House rent residential allowance. No. Can you at least report something and send it to us in terms of your definition?
Yes.
We just want a definition.
And however, in addition to that, we want to know those who are qualified for the house rent, house rent allowance and residential allowance.
Yes,
we want to know the difference.
Yes.
Who are
Can you give us more disclosure on that?
Please.
Give us more disclosure so that we understand more.
Honorable, should we send it in a written form or you require further explanation?
No, it's better to give disclosure. Just disclosure.
Yes, noted.
Disclosure. So we keep it on record. Yeah, any further? Two is fast approaching. So remember, any further?
And then I'm also interested about this bonus issue, because the guy was trying to compare the ferry and then the force. The bonus,
yes.
That is big. That is from 6.5 million to 30 million.
Okay.
So that is the same bonus. Yes, no light on that.
So, as I was explaining, the Honorable, yes, so ferry service is a subsidiary of GPA, and in order to boost staff morale, we do not want certain members of the staff, especially under the GPA role, to be paid bonus, while the others under the Ferris payroll are not paid. So as a result, all the subsidiaries under the GPA, including the Gambia Ferry Services, the Banyan Fisheries Jetty, the Banyan Shipyard, are all paid the bonus together with the GPA staff on the GPA payroll.
Yes. Yes, but looking at GPA and the Ferris, in terms of their financial performance and everything is different. So if you're paying a bonus based on, because GPA is paying this amount of bonus to its staff, they should also pay this amount of bonus to our staff. Do you think that this is sustainable?
Okay, I will come, let me just explain why we have that. If you, as I explained earlier, if you look at the ferry services, it's provided more like a social service. Because we are providing service, especially all the provincial stations, and we are not breaking even in those areas. The reason being that we are not charging the right tariff structure in those areas. And that is the reason why the company is in this situation. If you look over the years, you look at the, one of the fixed inputs we have is fuel. Over the years, since 2001, fuel prices have increased probably more than 500%. But if you look at the ferry fare, it's only, I think,
120%.
2013 that we had a 25% increase. So in order to be able to correlate these two, as the ferry price on other inputs are increasing, we must also progressively be increasing the ferry fare. But this is not the case. And this is why ferries is operating at a loss. But it does not mean that the company is actually not performing. Okay. Because these are factors that are outside the institution. And this is the reason why also GPA is all the time injecting money into ferries.
Yeah, but if you look at the records, the account, income statement, you had profit of 63 million in 2018.
Yeah.
So you are not necessarily an insolvent institution.
Yes.
Don't you think that with proper investment, you can attain the financial viability that is required? So would you say that the problem is more that it is working as a social institution, that the problem may also be not having strategic investment in ferries and what to be able to make it more profitable? Don't you think that what is really what has not been properly assessed and strategized on? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Honorable Chairman, thank you very much. If you look at 2018, we made a profit of almost 63 million.
Yeah.
And then in 2019, we reported a loss of 47 million.
47, almost.
47 million. And
46.9.
yes. That was due to the partial opening of the Senegambia Bridge. And then, the ferry service at that place also was closed. So in effect, our customers have been taken over by the bridge. And then as a result, the income, the revenue base also dropped significantly from a profit-making entity to a loss-making entity.
But you also became a service provider for the bridge.
At no cost.
Well,
at no fee.
Who is responsible? This is the issue. Right?
Yes.
So it does not mean that you do not have a source of income to compensate that. Is that something has not been done? And we are here. What are you recommending to us to be something that should be done to change that thing?
So, Mr. Chair, our recommendation is, which we also sent to government, is that.
This is Parliament. This is Parliament.
Yes.
Government is one thing. This is Parliament.
Yes. So we are proposing for the ferry service to wholly and fully handle the Senegambia Bridge. Because some of the reason would be that we have experience in handling traffic and customers along that route, noting that the ferry service have been operating at that route since 1957. So we have had a lot of experience there. And currently, from the opening of the Senegambia Bridge, it is the ferry service that put the facilities there to be able to collect the toll. And all those infrastructure, and of course and also pre-financing, the operation. So also, if you look at some years back when the ferry was viable, for example, this 2018, the revenue that was acquired from that Trans-Gambia crossing was also what was being used to subsidize the provincial crossing stations. In so doing, all the other provincial ferries, we were able to maintain those ferries and to keep the stations open. But since the closure of the ferry service there and the opening of the bridge, now it has become very difficult for the ferries to be able to maintain those provincial stations. And as a result, several of these stations were closed for a prolonged time. The Barajali ferry has been down for a very long time. We restored it some few months back. I think it was in August. Yeah, in August it was restored, and then the Kaur station also is also restored, and we still have a dub ferry at Bansan, and this is because now all of those stations are now dependent on the Banjun Bara, the revenue that is generated at Banjun Bara, which is not sufficient to sustain the ferries as a service.
Okay, so we can see now that you have another niche in really turning the ferry services company limited into a management service institution for the bridge. And you need to develop your expertise, your staff component, develop greater training, because we've talked about pre-financing. We hope that you've documented all this into a neat document that justifies that is really what ought to be able to manage not only that bridge, but what may come with other bridges. Yeah. So it means that you can develop that competence and to be earning, from that service a component that will be able to sustain your services. So this is what you are actually recommending.
Yes,
and probably move larger field into river transport. Yes. When the river transport component comes, well, you seek to handle it from GPA. Yeah. But that requires development. It means that you must begin to work on that as a tactic, as a strategy, for development of ferry services. Because this is what we do. We just allow the consultant to come and do the same thing for us when maybe we already have the knowledge base. All we need to do is to sit down and work it out and develop it into a concept. So, yes, members, do you have any more?
Yes,
that's where we.
I think we can really go to the post. Dividend. Page 35. GPA actual report. Yes. Yes, I think they paid 50 million dividend to the Gambia government, which really is very commendable. compared to other prestataries. But do you have any criteria or format you use for the payment of this 15 million?
Dividend payment policy.
Yes. I said it is really commendable, really. We really appreciate that. We also compare to other, but do you have any criteria or format?
Thank you, Honorable.
Really?
It was a contention between the board chair and the Minister of Finance, because the board chair was relying on the provisions of the Board Act that dividends should be consolidated revenue fund of government in consultation with the Ministry of Finance after the impact has been analyzed on the revenue and the investment proposal of the board. So the board was of the view that, well, you can make profit, but it should be plowed back rather than increasing the amount of dividend. So it was like kind of an engagement until the figure was arrived at. But there's a board decision that has been informed to government that a policy on dividend needs to be worked out. Yes.
Dividend policy.
Yes. I think the chair can explain because I was the one handling it with the minister.
Well, apparently it became...
They agreed.
But yeah,
But the policy is necessary.
yeah, but yeah, I think that was the important thing, that the resources could have been, we thought that if we had better use for the money than to put it in the considered revenue fund. But then there was some, like we said, the minister had the upper hand, so we at one point had to concede, but on the condition that they will come up with a dividend policy so that we can also know what we are can do as a board. Yeah.
Okay. So members, I believe that we have reached the point where we have sufficient information to be able to give a fair view of the state of play of the Gambia Ports Authority and the Gambia Ferry Services Company Limited. So in that regard, if these documents are to be utilized as the foundation for our report, then we must adopt them as fair presentation of the state of affairs of the Gambia Port Authority and the Gambia Ferry Services Limited for the year ended 31st December 2019. Those who deem these reports, with, of course, the amendments proposed, to duly reflect the state of play of the Gambia Port Authority and the Gambia Ferry Services for the year ended 31st December 2019, would then support the motion for adoption. Those in favor of adopting the activity report and financial statement for the year ended 31st December 2019, you may say so. Those in favor say aye.
One of these an objection.
Yes.
We want to adopt based on what we asked them to submit.
Yes.
More especially on things.
Yes. With amendments, the amendment. You want us to adopt with amendments, or you want us not to adopt at all?
Well, I think we have to discuss on that. Because those that we have, the incident we have on the field is...
Well, yes, then we can step down for 5 minutes, then make a motion for us to step down for 5 minutes to discuss.
Yeah, I move the motion that we step down for 5 minutes.
It is moved that we step down for 5 minutes to decide on some of the things that we need to get from ferries before adoption. But again, we must say, adoption does not mean endorsement. Just like the auditors do, it just represents a fair view of the state of affairs, that nice or ill, good or bad, but the fair view of the state of affairs of the company to enable us to look at the documents for final presentation to the plenary of a report on the given institutions.
Those who wish us to stand down for 5 minutes for reconsideration, any secondment, it is moved that we step down for 5 minutes for reconsideration. Any secondment of that motion?
Yes, second.
It is moved and seconded that we step down for 5 minutes for consideration. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those not in favor say no. The ayes have it. Board, would you allow us 5 minutes to consider what to do with the
Will we reconvene after the 5 minutes?
Yes, just for another 5 minutes and we go back. Well, you close, yeah.